Thrilled to be here. Thanks to Destination Think for asking me to speak. It's a really timely topic, as I'm sure you guys all feel. That's why you're here. And I wanted to start off by saying that if you feel like sometimes your marketing efforts are like shouting into a hurricane, you are right. You're not alone. So there was a study that came out a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago now, so they probably need an update. It's probably even more than this. But the study showed that we actually take in, on average, 100,000 words of content per day, written, textual, auditory, so verbal content. And to put that in perspective, that's like reading To Kill a Mockingbird every single day. So your messages, all of your ideas that are in text form are competing with this, hurricane of content, or messages, let's say, for attention for people's very, very short amount of time to digest. And this is why visuals come in handy, right? Visuals are incredibly efficient ways of delivering information. This is my favorite example. This is the definition of a circle versus the image of a circle. It's like, this gives you kind of a gut check of like how long it takes us to process one versus the other. And this is really, really compelling for me because my journey through my career has been actually ping-ponging back and forth between the two, visual and verbal, and I'll touch more on that later. And so this efficiency of visual information has really given rise to the visual revolution that Michaela mentioned, that the last several years, especially in social, we are just hungry for more and more digital content. And, it feels like ages ago that Pinterest and Instagram blew up, but that was 3 years ago? 4 years ago? It just feels like everything in the last 4 or 5 years has just become exploding with digital content. And then Facebook and Twitter revamped their interfaces to give us cover photos and huge timeline images. They gave it more real estate. Twitter actually has a tab now on your profile for your photo and video content. And it's easy to take those things for granted, but it really was last year that this happened. So this is pretty pictures of your vacation and your cat. That's just depicted here. We love to take photos. We love to share. Of course, this is also enabled by the magical devices that we're now all carrying around to create these high-quality photos. And it gives you stats. You've heard a lot of them. One of them is something like this, that images get 5 times as much engagement on a platform like Facebook. They get more shares, comments, and likes as text-based posts. And that's cool. That's great. Let's just put images in everything, it's like magic. But it actually, of course, like everything, is based in brain science. And our brains, visual processing accounts for over half of everything you do. So 50% of your sensory neurons are dedicated to processing visual input. And so it's this huge opportunity, huge opportunity for marketers. And in his book, Brain Rules, the neurobiologist John Medina, it's an amazing book. I highly recommend it for anyone who's interested in how people learn and how we pay attention, essentially. He focuses on the educational context, but it's very applicable to any time you want to keep and hold someone's attention. He said that, quote, "There may be strong reasons for entire marketing departments to think seriously about making pictorial presentations their primary way of transferring information." Pictorial presentations. You can clearly, he's a scientist, but I thought that really caught my eye. The book came out a few years ago, and it was really primarily pictorial presentations. And I think I'm excited by that, but I also have 2 questions about that. And one is, I don't think words need to go away. I'm a huge fan of words. We need words. They're incredibly important. But we've also been, the more critical thing I think that we're facing is that we've been segregating visual people and word people for a really, really long time. So, the picture people are like, ooh, I made this beautiful thing. It's so cool. Then I'm going to put some lorem ipsum in there and we'll get some words later, whatever the words will be. But it just looks so amazing. And I used to be a picture person. I was a graphic designer for a while. I know what that's like. And I've been a writer, and I'm people spend time crafting beautiful words, and then they're like, well, let's get a picture to illustrate it and kind of zhuzh it up a little and it's icing on the content cake. Really the meat of this information is in our words. And so I really think that the future for us to thrive in the visual revolution and the coming world of trying to get people to pay attention to our stuff is to combine the two. And that is what I'd like to talk about. Basically, how do we help ourselves become more visually literate? If you're a word person, kind of breaking down how you think about pictures so that you can feel more fluent, and also experiment with creating your own images with some of the amazing tools that are out there now to DIY and experiment with. And then if you're a picture person, how do you become interdependent with the verbal content and verbal messages and ideas? So that's what excites me, that's what I like, is the idea that we're starting to get bilingual. But in language can be tricky, and so that brings me to the word content, because the word content is often applied to all of this stuff that we make. Like we make a blog post, we make a tweet, we make an infographic, we make a video, and it's like all these things that we make, that is content. And I've been around content marketing for many years now, and it's always kind of bugged me. And I realized that why that was because I think that what we're talking about here is actually the media. That's the media. And the content is our message, our idea. So the core idea, the core concept or message is then translated out into all these medias. And my premise for this presentation was that if you could alter that perception slightly, then you're going to spend a lot more time multiplying this one idea, giving this idea the power of 10, instead of coming up with a new idea for every different media. And hopefully that makes sense. And so I actually, just to break it down a little bit, because I think the word content has become so ingrained in how we think, I actually went back to art school. So my visual verbal collage of career started in college when I combined writing and art history and graphic design. It's a thing. I can't choose. I had changed my major like 5 times. But art history was interesting because when you talk about art in art history, when you talk about picture making and pictures in the art historical context, you talk about content. We talk about the word content. So a painting isn't content. The content of the painting is the evening sky. So like the topic, the message, the idea here is the evening sky. It's not a thing, like the thing itself is not the content. So the format, the medium, is a painting of a certain size made with oil paint, and the content is the evening sky. The medium may be a lot of things, right? Like it could be any of these things that contain the same content, but are actually different media, different formats, and distributed quite differently. So that's kind of the shift in thinking. Then you also have the other layer of style or execution. So the style in which the content is depicted is post-impressionist painting. So we have separating these things out, I think, is like the first step for me in helping translate between visual and verbal. It's like when we talk about all of these things, what do we really mean? So is everybody with me so far? Okay, cool. So that reminded me of art history. And I thought it was useful because while style can vary, content can remain the same. So the content of all of these is the evening sky. It's actually now the content has become Van Gogh's representation of the evening sky, but it is in very, very different styles and media. So we have mosaic and digital and more digital, different kinds of digital portrayal. So the style can vary, the content remains the same, which means you can take a core idea and translate it into many, many different media. And probably you're already doing some of this, like blog posts become a tweet, and you're probably repurposing and cross-pollinating in some ways already. But if you get it really what is our core message, and then defining the visual asset library that you can actually create from those key verbal ideas, it helps your message spread a lot further. You turn one blog post into an entire campaign, essentially. So if we're starting from the word side, right, you would take your bullet points, your outline, your key points, and create an image for each one of those. And not just like a decorative or representative image, like really giving some thought to how could you express those key points in images. Now sometimes it's basic, like let's say it's a walking tour and you have pictures of all the things, but like we're going to talk more about style and the ways that you can make your images more memorable in a little bit. But just for the basic, whenever you're creating verbal content, think of a way to make each point also visual, because that will come in handy later. So when you're thinking about those images, you have to start thinking about, now we're moving into media. We're taking content, we're putting it into media. And for every still image you want to have these, I think these three shapes are kind of your keys. You have your basic postcard, your sort of reminiscent of the film of actual photographic film, right? Like the 5x7, the 4x6, which is completely like the only reason we look at pictures in that shape is because it used to be the size of a viewfinder, which is kind of interesting to think about. Something that's mobile friendly, depending on where your messages are going to end up. Make sure your image, whether it's a photo or a drawing or a computer generated image, is making sure that it could be a square is really helpful. And then sometimes you want that cover photo, that banner, that header image. So it's just kind of like, when I say still image, I actually mean like three, right? 3 distinct images for each of those still images. And then you take your simple still images and you can remix them in a lot of interesting ways. And so there's sort of new formats, but I've outlined a handful that I really think are kind of the most versatile. So the social image you've seen probably of this classic image with text. And there's a lot of interesting relationships that can be done there beyond a simple quote, beyond like image as wallpaper, like thinking about how to help the text and the image support each other. You can actually, create a slide deck out of those still images that you created by adding the text that you already have. You can make a more data-driven narrative and combine those still images into an infographic, which is a complicated term, but I didn't have time to get into the semantics of infographics in this presentation. I really like what I've been seeing now in mobile-friendly emails that I get on my phone. They have a graphic, like a picture is the button that you click. There's apps now that allow you to combine still images into GIFs, which is incredibly engaging because our brain has an entire section that's devoted to picking up on motion. And we have all these little instances in which you can post GIFs to Instagram, you can post them on Facebook, you can tweet them. These are your kind of most versatile next step visual assets. So you have the single images, then you combine them with some simple DIY tools, and then now you have this complete collection of visual media. So the bonus one, sorry, to back up just a second. So your videos can be cross-posted, you can tweet them, you can Facebook them, you can Pinterest them, you can YouTube them, you can do all the things. Slides pretty much live on SlideShare, but I'm sure that there are some interesting other ways to share them, including in emails. You can have infographics actually can be posted to free directories to share, and GIFs I mentioned, and buttons could be in your email newsletters or in blog posts. So you're starting to get like this whole universe from just one core idea, like a handful of bullet points. So the bonus number one is that images actually do help your SEO. If you have the keyword of your keyword you're interested in ranking for in the in the file name, and the image is displayed kind of above the fold on your page, you should also have keywords in your caption text. And I don't have like numbers because I'm not an SEO person, but there's definitely a benefit because Google does take into account image file names and captions. And then the second bonus is that idea of like sharing these assets you've created and becoming a resource for all your partners, for those buddy bloggers that your buddy blogger program, or for promoters, for people who are interested in. If you can find an interesting angle or narrative and turn it into this range of visual media. You can post cool images that you find or create on things like Flickr under a Creative Commons license. You can promote them. The infographic directories I mentioned, you can make your infographics embeddable so that they link back. Pinterest is a huge engine, of course, as you are, I'm sure, aware of, like helping people find your content and letting them know that they can share it. So, this is the only chart in my whole presentation. I had to make a chart for this. But so this is the idea of, like, you have your 3 kinds of still images, 4 kinds of still images, and then your combined images, and then these are all the kind of possibilities. So with just one core idea, you're turning it into 50 possible touch points. I could go back if anybody. It's a lot. You won't do every single one every time. You don't need to do it always, but I just felt like it was really efficient to start thinking about visual media as a way to support your messages as much as your words. So the problem with visual processing is that we're really fast at it, and we actually get really good at ignoring the consistently irrelevant. So this is eye tracking from web ads, okay? So like advertisers wanted to know, hey, how do people look at our ads? And the answer is not at all. Because you can clearly see that there's a lot of activity and then absolutely none, because we just know that, like, you don't even look over there, like, don't even bother. And so that's the kind of one caveat to the visual media. You can't just add color and, like, make it a GIF and, like, be like, hey, look, like, you have to be relevant. Whoa, hey, there's interesting. You have to actually be relevant, and that is the trick. So getting into the center, getting into the editorial, or potentially using another method is what we're going to talk about. We're talking about boosting relevance. So boosting relevance is a really interesting topic, and I also would refer you to brain rules because it's fascinating how our minds work. We are programmed to pay attention to things that are either kind of like immediately dangerous or emotionally relevant, right? Like if you see your friend and your friend is upset, I mean, like, you just exclude all else. So boosting relevance would mean adding emotion, and that we are very hardwired to look at faces. So always including real people when you can is awesome. Not stock, because it's that web ad effect again, right? Like, you can just tell when it's stock photography and you just dismiss it. It has no weight whatsoever. So that, again, it's not just adding images. It really matters, like, what quality of images you source. Not always pleasant. There was a recent MIT study about memorability in images, and which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, but they found that pleasantness is not, like, your instinct is to make, and it's interesting, when I was putting this together, it was interesting thinking through the lens of, like, what if I was a destination marketer, right? Like, of course you want to, like, best foot forward and, like, look at our beautiful place and, like, have the sweeping vista of wherever it is. But you actually, I think, and I feel like this is, like, the difference between brochure copy and, like, someone's first person account of something, the verbal equivalent is, like, without some sort of shadow or grit, without some sort of sense that it's a real place, we tend to discount it. If you're 100% pleasant all the time, and I love that This Is Cleveland's kind of set me up perfectly for that, because, like, they're just like, this is us. It's, like, funky, it's not quite perfect, and, like, a little edgy, and so, like, edgy doesn't have to be your brand, but just think about, like, how to give it some veritas, for lack of a better word, because Latin is always popular. I didn't think of that till just now. The other way to boost relevance is specificity, which kind of ties back to the pleasant thing. But if you pick up any 2 magazines and look at the images in them, you will, if they're good magazines, you're going to see that they have a tone of voice to their imagery. You can actually have a visual tone of voice. And so you want to kind of think about fostering this editorial point of view. Like, is it quirky and kitschy? Is it hipster? Is it sleek and edgy and modern? Like, what are the ways that your style and execution of your images could make it feel really specific to what you're trying to portray? Extremes provoke curiosity. So that's sort of like, you remember those like science magazines when you were a kid and they had like really super close-ups of like some household object and you're like, what is that, you know? And it's that kind of idea that by not making someone work for it a little, like making someone not immediately know what you're looking at. And I could have spent like probably 20 more hours trying to find examples of all of these things because I used to be a photo editor and this is like really fun for me. But just the idea of that, like not kind of revealing it all in the photo or drawing or whatever it is. And then building on prior knowledge, this is another kind of neuroscientific idea that people will pay attention to something that they know about, that they've seen before. So this is what happens when you go on Facebook and you see that pair of shoes that you were looking at like 2 weeks ago and like suddenly it's in the sidebar and you're just like, now I'm looking at a web ad because those were the shoes I was gonna buy. And it's like the recognition response, if you can think of some way to give people something that they recognize. And I know you're not gonna, I mean, you have to think broadly, right? Because you don't know what everybody knows. But it's just, I think that's why celebrities get wound up in advertising so much, because we have this sense of like, you're drawn to them because you know about them, you know who they are. And so something that's gonna need to be extrapolated, but that's a good way to get people to pay attention. So then we've talked about media, we talked about still images, but still images could be any number of things. So I'm gonna touch on, I'm realizing actually that I've kind of goofed. There's one more, there's word as image, and we're gonna get to the glitch in my slide deck in a minute. But basically, my career has spanned all three of these styles. I started in visual communication and doing graphic design with a lot of digital heavy stuff. I spent a stint as a photo editor in publications, and now I draw for a living, and now I teach Word and a number of people how to draw simple pictures, and it's fun. And there's also, you could go on and on. All of three of these could be combined in numerous ways. So just, I encourage everyone to pick up the odd communication arts magazine and start, I don't know, wherever your curiosity takes you, just start to immerse yourself in some interesting visual media, because I think I would love to see the first collage infographic or like knitted, you know, banner cover photo, I don't know, like just like whatever, like it could be sculpture. Photography, so this is, I live in Beacon, New York. I grew up in Austin, Texas, woohoo. But I live in Beacon, New York, which is in the Hudson Valley, an hour north of New York City. I love it there. I should be a DMO for Beacon, where I live. It's like everyone should go visit. It's amazing. And I noticed, I started following, you know how Instagram works. You just like someone mentions somebody and then you like end up following someone. You don't know how. But this is like a web-based magazine for the Hudson Valley called And North. So it's like New York City and North. And which is a little bit like, we're more than that, but they're doing a really nice job of an editorial point of view. They have really beautiful use of color. But this is, I picked their feed because they're doing something maybe just intuitively that that MIT study I mentioned earlier about the memorability of images. They found that the number one thing that makes images memorable is people. They also have a lot of, I'd be really curious, I'd like MIT, I'm gonna write MIT and have them break down, like, is it count if it's just a hand or like part of a person, because clearly he has no head, and they do a lot of photos where people are holding things, and I think you are still drawn to them more. They also snuck in a dog, so I think I'd like a breakout on animals. And this was interesting, I'd never heard this before, but like human scale is really memorable. So if you feel like you can step into a place that it's like to your proportions, you know, like you just walked in the room and took that picture with your phone, that is the second most memorable. And then the third was close-up of objects. So that's something to think about when you're sourcing photography in particular, like how to keep scale in mind. And unfortunately, the least memorable were the like large, beautiful landscape photos. So it's like, you know, this is the feeling of coming home from vacation and you look at all your beautiful landscape photos and you're just like, I wish I took more pictures of people. And this is that. Thanks, MIT. this was, I thought, a cool example of specificity and curiosity. You know, at first glance, who knows what those are? And then you see decor, so you think, okay, they probably are lamps. But it's also just a very editorial topic, which I think makes a lot of sense and drew me in. Sorry, I'm just going to catch up with myself. Yeah. So this is getting out of that kind of brochure photography box and getting a little more zoomed in on the quirks and specifics of a place. This is interesting because this is like a cross between photography and illustration, and you would need some mad Photoshop skills, but the eggs are the shape of Maui, the island of Maui. So this is 12 breakfast spots on Maui. And I just thought that was amazing. You know, they've turned the eggs into a map, like, cute. But, you know, a lot of times this is kind of, I'm remembering now, like when I was talking about being picture people and word people, it's like, the picture is kind of like dependent on the verbal content. Like for the map to have meaning, you need the names of these places and what you want to get there. So you wouldn't just have the eggs in the shape of Maui. I mean, you could, but the list without the image would be a little like without the locations. It wouldn't show the locations. So we're layering them here in a way that's interdependent, which I really like, and I love, especially when you can't really pull the image and the words out without losing something. I think that would be my test. You know, it's like, would you care if one or the other was gone? And I think for both you would. And then the other thing is usually see these as sort of a standalone piece. Like that's cool, but that could be a slide deck, it could be a video, it could be a blog post, it could be, you know, all the different kinds of content we mentioned. They already have all the images of their beautiful places and dishes. And that's easily, you know, 10 different kinds of content right there. So if they haven't spent any time taking this one piece they created and populating it out, then I think they should. And then by all means, if you live in a place with cute animals, you are required by law to use them, by marketing law. But I mean, faces, adorable, like emotional relevance. This is not a word picture combo, but I couldn't resist. And so but this made me think about, so I follow Australia on Instagram, and I'm hoping to go there in 2017. I've just been to Sydney once. And I wonder, so Jesse is the director of social media for Australia, and he has this incredible network. I mean, I've heard people talk about already today how to partner and like source from your people who love where they live and who are avid, you know, promoters of where they live as a destination. And one of the animal photos they had was posted by a park ranger, and it was just the most beautiful photograph. And I was like, do you know which of your park rangers are on Instagram? Like, that should be a thing that you do, is like find out who on the ground in the wild is on Instagram, because you just don't get closer and better than this. And then you also don't get mauled by animals in Yellowstone like people do. So this is, I had the privilege of going to Istanbul in August, and I was like, hey, I'm going to search the hashtag for Istanbul. And so this is just an idea of like, you know, who's posting what, searching the hashtags, ask before they were posting. I think this is kind of classic, but I'm guessing this person probably didn't take this photo, so it gets into a little bit of a legal gray area. But it could also give you some ideas of some hashtags you should be using, because I mean, that's a lot of hashtags. And then the idea of like, you could take an image like that as an inspiration for the Blue Mosque was built, I think it has 7 minarets, and that is like one of the architectural features that defines it. And so turning this into a map and other ways to like play up, like creating a story from an unusual image is something I'll talk about too in a little bit. Draw. So probably photography feels like home base for a lot of people. We have cameras with us all the time. You probably see a lot of photos. But maps are like a rich territory for drawing and in terms of destination content. And they're a great way to add relevance and personality. So this example is drawn by an artist who just loves riding her bike around Estero, Florida. So if Estero, Florida, you're here, contact this artist who's name I didn't put on there, so I should do that. And she has like little commentaries. So this is, in my opinion, this is another instance of like when the words complement the images. It's not just a map. It's not like where you can go biking. She has little commentary on like, hey, you know, share the road, and like, I am like a bike. Life is bliss. I don't know. It's a little less. It's not editorial. It's more evocative. But she does. What does it say? Yard sales. So that's a good neighborhood for yard sales. And it doesn't have to be. This is obviously one woman's personal take, but you could have a tone of voice like that would make it more relevant. I found this map actually on a website called They Draw and Travel. So pretty awesome. They are great on Instagram as well. And you can find a map, you can search. They have over 1,200 maps that have been submitted by people who draw maps, and then you have map makers for hire. So you could commission a map, ask your illustrator to submit it here. You could find a map maker. I think the possibilities are really endless. And then you could easily see how each piece of this image could become 10, 12 distinctive different images that could be incorporated into a slide share or into a blog post, etc. This was my, I don't do caricatures. I'm not a caricature artist. I do draw a lot of cartoony people, but once, when I wanted to create this, I traced a headshot in Photoshop. I just drew over the lines so that it made it more like John Jansch was in a graphic novel. So that was just DIY. I didn't commission it. I mean, I do draw for a living, but like literally this is tracing. So. Vector graphics we're all very familiar with. I won't dwell too much on it, but I found this. This is just the tip part of the infographic because so this is my thing about infographics. I think they're really awesome and there's a lot of great content in there, but who reads like the long skinny thing, with the scrolling? I mean, it looks really good on Pinterest, but like break that up and make it a calendar and make it like, I realize, I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. Make it more readable, make it 5 other kinds of content so that I'm not only going to see this cool calendar about how you can go, what happens with all the wildlife in every month in the Galapagos Islands in this one skinny thing that is now living in Evernote, and I can't print it. Exactly. Yeah, make it mobile friendly, like something. Oh, and then this is where you see the glitch in my presentation. Yes, word is image. So think about how words can become images themselves. You're spending a lot of time crafting words. You may have access to a lot of verbal data. Maybe you have user feedback and comments, and could that be a word cloud? Could you turn raw bits of raw information, raw words into some sort of visual form? This is a particularly nice print of all the names of the cities in Italy done as a map of Italy. And there's endless possibilities here. So my last tips, I just, legibility first. If you've ever watched a video, and perhaps this presentation with me going back and forth, audio quality is the analogy here. Like if the audio is bad, you can't stand it. If you can't read it, you have 10 seconds to get people's attention, and it's gone. Ideas before tools. That is just like, don't let the cool new tool dictate your idea. Start with your idea first, and then find the right tool for the job and the right execution, the right style, the right media. Think in pixels, which is just to say that pixel dimensions are relative. They're relative to the size of a screen, and since we live in the world of screens, take a few minutes to kind of get your head around how things translate from screen to screen. Less can be more. I just couldn't resist a presentation without a Volkswagen ad, because this is like classic, you can't take the words away, you can't take the picture away, like graphic design 101, but don't overdo it, Try to see what happens when you use like the fewest elements possible. And then leave breadcrumbs. I don't know how many times I found really amazing images or GIFs of the night sky that I'm like, where is that? I want to go there. And like, I don't know, it was embedded from here and it was put on Tumblr, and then they just put a watermark on it, just like, ChileanDesert.com or whatever it is, but like, just show me how to get to the place and give it some, marketing value without being obnoxious. DIY, if you feel like you're a picture first person, like there's a lot of tools like Canva, apps galore. Instagram is a great way to start. Just practice image making, try it for yourself. Don't be afraid to experiment. And we've talked a little bit like how can you take an image, a provocative, interesting image, and reverse engineer the verbal content from that. Could you use something as inspiration to work backwards into the bullet points? And then we talked about content is king. Well, in the brain, and this is where I'll end, in the brain, the vision is king. I mentioned it's half of all that your brain is doing all the time is processing visual information. And so again, with Brain Rules, apparently the only book I read, he talks about there's only so much real estate in your brain, and all of your senses are competing for space. And so we are actually, because we're so vision dependent, we have damaged 60% of our genes related to our sense of smell, and we're heading to, our sense of smell is gonna be like obsolete at a rate 4 times faster than any species sampled. So that makes it more than king, it's actually a dictator. It's like aggressively taking over our sense of smell because it needs more real estate. And so just remember, to be human is to be visual, and that's all I have. Thank you so much.